Okay, good morning. My name's Rick Martin. I'm Habanera's ECM practice lead, and I'm going to be walking you through our webinar today around ideas to boost compliance. Just before we hit up the content, we've got a few logistics to cover off. This is our coffee break webinar format. This is a 30-minute time frame, so hopefully you can step away from your day without too many distractions and without too much of a time commitment. We've got about 25 minutes of content, followed by a 5-minute Q&A period. My colleague Spencer Perry here will be monitoring the questions throughout, and we'll respond to as many as we can at the end. So if you have any questions, please just submit them through the webinar software. If we don't get to them all at the end of the session, we'll follow up with you directly at the end. So today, as we've discussed, we're talking about how we can boost records management compliance. Given the title of the webinar and the fact that we have people on the line, I think it's safe to say that this is a challenge for many organizations. It makes sense. It's a complex field, part people, part process, part technology. Before we discuss our strategies for boosting compliance, let's spend a little bit of time exploring the problems that are preventing compliance. This will put our ideas into context and provide the rationale for why we believe these strategies work. So we have to go back a few years, 100 in fact, back to 1915. So in the years leading up to 1915, the Industrial Revolution had changed the world of work. Big-scale manufacturing had taken hold, with companies like Ford Motor Company and US Steel coming to represent outstanding examples of industry. For example, in 1909, Ford was producing 10,000 Model Ts per year. By 1915, that number had surpassed 500,000. During this time, the chassis assembly time was reduced from 12.5 hours to 1.5 hours. This staggering 50-fold increase in productivity, not surprisingly, became the example of how employees work, as companies everywhere sought to replicate Ford's success. Employees worked as if they were machines. Really, the technology of the day was deployed to dehumanize people. 100 years later, workplaces can often try to dehumanize their people in order to drive productivity. But the world of work is a very different looking place today. The tasks required of people to be successful in their jobs are no longer routine mechanical tasks. Jobs are now highly creative, highly collaborative, and more people are mobile and distributed. These are not really topics of discussion that are typically confronted when discussing records management, and yet these are the people, the end users, the stakeholders, and the customers that we aim to touch, to influence, and to change as we engage in records management programs. To extend this notion just a little bit further before we get into our strategies, the US Census Bureau has been tracking employment patterns since the 1970s. It's reported this precipitous decline in routine mechanical occupations in those 40 years. Accompanying this decline in these routine mechanical occupations has been a corresponding increase in these creative, non-routine occupations. You can see here on the chart we're presenting. A particularly interesting piece of this data, I think, are the grey bars. These grey bars represent recessions. These recessions are actually accelerating these trends. Think about what that means in regards to our current business environment. So, why are we struggling with compliance? Well, fundamentally, we believe that this is why we struggle with compliance. Firstly, people are not robots. Routine mechanical tasks such as declaring records or even disposing of them are not tasks that people are interested in performing. Furthermore, these particular routine mechanical tasks are not activities that are related to most end users' jobs, so end users don't really care about them. And finally, as we go forwards, we don't actually need to foist these sorts of tasks onto our end users. I hope to show you today that there's a better way. This will free you, as records managers, up to focus on more strategic, high-value work within your organizations. And it will free up your end users to focus on their work, ideally creative, non-routine occupations that engage and empower them. So now we're going to get into our strategies for boosting compliance. As you probably have gathered, these strategies for boosting compliance are about engaging the end users, reducing and eliminating challenges that they face, measuring the results, and then finally iterating based on the lessons that we learn through the process. The first strategy, and for me the one with the most upside, is to focus on the end user's jobs. All records managers understand that they need to engage end users, of course. Gone, by and large, are the days that no attention is paid to those end users. But this attention can still fall short of actually supporting the end users. Enlightened record managers are not just thinking about engaging end users, but they have a clear intention to support and enable end users, rather than getting the end users to support and enable the records managers. Being slightly cheeky, we need to change our intention from how can I help them help me to how can I help them. This is a substantial shift in records management, requiring different approaches and potentially different and additional skills and capabilities than have been traditionally used within this arena. This will result in a new level of compliance, and it also provides a fantastic opportunity for delivering additional value into organizations. For me, this gets at the heart of records management programs within organizations. When you strip away everything else, what is the purpose of records management initiatives? This has been a question that we've included in our recent ECM research initiative at Habanero. We asked a collection of clients and other industry contacts, what is the primary purpose of your organization's records management initiative? We let the respondents answer with multiple answers. We didn't give them any options. This was a free-form conversation. So what was the answer? Well, as you'd expect, all of the organizations were focused on compliance as a purpose of their records management initiative. But most organizations also cited some sort of business productivity, business sustainability, or business efficiency as well. Interestingly, 2 organizations, big mature organizations, actually ranked this business productivity consideration over compliance, citing that whilst they understood compliance is very important, staying in business and being competitive is essential. So the takeaway here is that organizations are treating records management initiatives as an opportunity to deliver compliance and also to deliver other benefits into the organization. In our experience, these other benefits drive compliance because you're engaging and empowering your end users, not the other way around. One really great example of focusing on end users' jobs is this project to develop an online form from a paper-based form. This form is a checklist that must be reviewed before any work can be performed, a critical piece of work in their process. From a compliance standpoint, this checklist is a critical record for the organization. It proves diligence, proves that the correct process has been followed. And of course, this proof must be kept. The paper forms were becoming unmanageable because of the volume of forms and the scanning and subsequent oversight that was required. As a result, our client wanted to develop an electronic checklist instead of a paper form. The way that it works is that once the checklist form is submitted, an electronic record is kept of that submission, who submitted it and when it was submitted. As you can see from the screen, the checklist was developed for mobile access to ensure that it was tailored to meet the needs of the end users. They're typically on the road. So as I mentioned, this form directly supports the end users. It's much quicker to complete and submit than a paper equivalent, and you don't have a piece of paper at the end. It also increases compliance, both from the actual work perspective and the record trail of that work being done. So there are 3 outcomes with this approach. Firstly, it supports the end users in achieving their jobs within the organization, delivering more value to the organization. Secondly, it reduces the routine mechanical work, improving engagement and empowering the end user. And this isn't just the end user. This is the person who's filling out the form. This is all of the people downstream from that person. And finally, it's boosting compliance because our end users are engaged and we've empowered them in their jobs. So one word of warning here, as awesome as this is, it's not always totally possible to achieve this in all areas of your discipline. Many areas will struggle to develop a story like this. As we see it, there are a set of conditions that are needed for this to come to life. If we have time at the end of the webinar, we can dig into those conditions a little bit further. These webinars are too short. Okay, we're going to move on to our next topic. The second strategy for boosting compliance is about reducing barriers. This is really about a holistic view of the entire solution domain. Don't stop at just at the edges of the ECM or the records management solution. Things to think about in this context are, where is the user? What is their environment? Are they mobile? Do they have a desktop? What do they have to deal with to access the solution? Do they have some gnarly VPN, or do they have some complex security process to go through? What about training or support for the end users? Are they accessing the system every day, or are they accessing the system once a month? How much attrition or turnover in the personnel is there? You won't always be able to address all of these issues, but understanding where your users are at and the context with which they're accessing your system will help a lot. If you want to get really sophisticated here, you can approach this from a discipline of service design. This dives deeply into the experience of end users, their physical world, their realities, and even their mental journey as they go through the process. The first topic within reducing barriers is around isolated systems. Actually, this is really about isolated business processes. What we found is that the work is being done in one context. Maybe this is file sharing, SharePoint, or email. But then the records are being stored in a totally separate context, in potentially even another system. Just because it's a record doesn't mean that your users don't need to be able to access it as quickly and as efficiently as everything else. In fact, if they can't, they'll either keep a spare copy or they won't declare it. Obviously, these are both entirely suboptimal outcomes. This isn't necessarily about integration. This is about accessibility. Another barrier that users can often face that can be quite challenging to overcome is an annoying, difficult, or unwelcome login scenario. Going back several years within Habanero, we had this Java WatchGuard type of app that was very secure but incredibly inconvenient when trying to access our company resources remotely. The day we removed that app was the day that accessibility and productivity soared. Of course, there is a very real conversation to be had here in regards to security versus access, and we're not saying for one moment discard your security considerations, but we would recommend that you have that conversation. So this is an example of a Habanero login screen. It's easy, it's accessible. Hopefully people can get through this login screen with a positive state of mind. Okay, so the next topic that we're going to cover off is too much records management vocabulary. What we recommend here is that you have a critical look at the vocabulary and jargon that you're putting in front of your end users. Do they really understand what you're talking about? There are lots of ways to objectively evaluate this. One way that we use internally is usability testing. This outs not just jargon, but other usability issues, bad information architecture, or poor user experience, generally speaking. So an interesting example of this is working with one of our clients' tax teams. They were looking for an approach to gather information when preparing for an audit. In preparing for each audit, the tax team would work through a set of predetermined questions, resulting in a collection of responses. These are typically documents. Because this is an audit process, all of these responses would be treated as records. So we designed and built an ECM solution to support this process, simplifying and removing these barriers as we went. The solution we implemented allows them to collect and prepare all of the responses for a single audit in one place. In this case, this was the dedicated team site within SharePoint. As the responses get uploaded, the documents are automatically declared as records with the required retention rules applied. This overall approach removed several barriers for the users. Firstly, it was the same system that they already knew, in this case SharePoint. The second barrier we removed was records declaration. This solution automatically declared the records for them. We were able to do that because we knew the exact nature of the business process we're supporting. And finally, the predetermined questions were written from the perspective of a tax professional, not an ECM professional, with the metadata and the records rules being applied automatically based on their answers. Okay, so now we're going to move into our third topic for boosting compliance. So invisible compliance is our term for doing as much as we possibly can to remove the work of becoming compliant from the end user. By this we mean auto classification, automatically adding in metadata, and even auto declaration of records. A key strategy to achieve this is to integrate your collaboration function with your records management system, similar to what we described in the previous section. Some records management solutions, one example that we work with is called CollabWare CLM, will allow you to set up auto declaration of records. This is a screenshot of Habanero's recruitment site. Obviously these names are fictitious for obvious reasons. The recruitment team within Habanero works, shares and collaborates on the incoming resumes, they create interview notes as people go through our hiring process. And then finally, before the offer letter goes out, they undertake reference checks, storing the responses in the appropriate sections as you can see on the screen. Once we decide to hire a candidate, we send them an offer letter. These offer letters, and of course the resulting acceptance from the new habaneros, get moved into the offer letters and acceptances work area, as you can see here. Through this process, they're instantly recognized as being records, and then they're tagged and declared as such. Once they're records, however, they're left in place because they are still useful artifacts for the hiring team to be able to view after the fact. This is a screenshot of where the matching process is set up within Collabware. In this very simple example, the first highlight shows that we're matching some kind of agreement, an employee contract in this example. Highlight number 2 shows some specifics about the match, and then finally the third highlight shows the conditions behind making that match in the first place. In this case, that condition is as simple as when a metadata field is set to agreement type, then that matches the document to the agreement object within the system, setting all of the necessary records management facets in place. So now we're going to move into our fourth and final strategy for boosting compliance. This strategy is called Measure and Evolve. The key here is that you need to treat this type of ECM implementation approach as a journey, not a one-time thing. There are several pieces to thinking about this as a journey. Firstly, developing a roadmap. The second piece is governance as you go through this journey. And the third piece is that measurement piece, what we call evidence and insights. Solution delivery does not indicate success. That's a powerful observation. Solution delivery does not indicate success. Instead, you have to consider this as a journey. No one would ever suggest that having your IT help desk open only for the first week after deployment would make sense. In the same way, you need to continuously develop and refine the solution itself. Ending your ECM initiative when you initially deliver the solution, of course, is a surefire way to reduce compliance, decrease business value, and really quickly alienate your users. This strategy describes some of the key areas that you need to consider to make this a reality. The first component to discuss is roadmap development. For us, roadmap development is an intensely collaborative process. Our experience is that the stakeholders in the final roadmap really need to own that roadmap, and for that, they need to be central to the process of building it. Habanero's process for building roadmaps is really oriented towards complex enterprises. We find that we're able to drive consensus within a big collection of diverse stakeholders, often with very differing agendas. The steps that we go through are as follows. The first step in the process is to develop a vision. This is typically done with the project leads or the executives. The key here is to focus on the way that we want to transform the organization, or focus on the project outcomes. Ideally, this is substantially informed by the overall organizational vision or current business imperatives. Once you understand where you're aiming to go, the next step is to identify core principles or strategies to get there. An example of a core principle might be access anywhere or people first. The next step is to itemize the pieces of the work itself. Ideally, these are tangible components or maybe sub-projects within the overall program of work. In the work that we do, we typically solicit these via a series of stakeholder interviews within our clients' organizations. Once you have identified these three core pieces, the vision, the principles, and the individual components, the next step is to walk through the prioritization and ordering of those components with all of the stakeholders. This is really typically done through workshops, roundtables, and other forums. Our recommendation here is discuss, discuss, and discuss. This is a critical piece of the consensus building. The stakeholders must be and must feel engaged and involved in order to get the traction and the overall agreement once the final roadmap is produced. Finally, it's worth noting that these roadmaps don't need to be set in stone. In fact, there's value in considering the roadmap as a living document that can be updated as business needs or priorities change. So this is an example of one of our roadmaps. These are intentionally very visual. Typically they're printed out and hung up in the project room. When you print it out full size, it's 3 foot by 8 foot. We found that printing out full size drives a different type of interaction between the project members. Our direct experience is that having such a large visual artifact promotes this sort of level of impromptu conversation and insights that would not happen without the roadmap. So our second topic within Measure and Evolve is governance. When we discuss governance, I'm referring to the program and solution governance, not information governance per se. Effective governance is critical to give your records management program the structure, funding, and backing it needs to succeed. As we discussed previously, solution delivery doesn't indicate project success. Project success is much more of an ongoing condition. Just because records are being declared on day 1 doesn't mean that records continue to be declared on day 101. Business needs, business users, and business processes are continually changing, sometimes slowly, sometimes drastically. An ECM program that is tightly tied to the business users in the way that we're describing in this webinar will need to adapt with those business users. And this stream of work, whether it's net new or whether it's adaptations, needs to be reckoned for in the overall planning process. Our final topic within this overall strategy is what we call evidence and insights. Evidence and insights is Habanera's approach for measuring the outcomes of our solutions and refining them, or working with our clients to refine them. Evidence verifies success, insights help improve. Evidence should link your solution back to your vision, strategies, and outcomes. Ideally, the roadmap that we discussed should describe specific outcomes that you can measure. Insights are achieved through a process that is part data mining, part anthropology, part data science. Our experience is that this can be a relatively time-consuming task, 1 to 2 days a month, to really get into the data and understand what it means. There's a lovely example of this evidence and insights approach with respect to the New York City Fire Department using data, their term, and insights to be more predictive when determining buildings that are high risk for fires. If you'd like this, please let me know after the webinar and I'll send it to you directly. When we think about developing evidence, we want to measure the things that we, our stakeholders, and our end users really care about. This means that we measure standard records management metrics, but we also want to think more broadly than records management or even enterprise content management. The model that we use here internally at Habanera is one of usage, events, and experiences. Usage is self-explanatory and not necessarily all that valuable. It's kind of like measuring page views. This is the simplest form of a measurement available to us. Events, these are things that most solution users can identify with in the context of ECM, typically declaring records or having them auto-declared, disposition, creating or releasing hold, working with convenience files. The most valuable areas to be able to measure are experiences. These get right at the heart of end users' jobs, and I'd include records managers in that list of end users. The value of being able to identify and track experiences is that we're really close to the things that are very valuable outcomes for the business. This could be completion of a disposition lifecycle, holding files for e-discovery, or completing a business process, such as the checklist that we saw previously. Finally, this is an example report from one of our ECM projects. Considering our model, these are more oriented towards events, count of potential records, active records and non-records, and so on. While this report can lead to some useful information, this is a prime example of there being value in digging in deeper to extract further insights from this data. Why, for example, might there be an increase in one particular type of documents over another? Are there other data that we can use to determine if that's expected and desired? Are we missing records, or are we just capturing convenience files that we can dispose of quickly? So that wraps up our last strategy for boosting compliance. So just to quickly iterate through them, our 4 strategies. Firstly, focus on the end user's jobs. Be really clear that your intention is about engaging and supporting your end users in achieving their jobs. Secondly, reducing barriers. Think about the all-up environment that they are working in. Think about where the barriers there are preventing them from being successful. Our third one is invisible compliance. Take away all or as much as possible of the work they have to do to be compliant. And finally, measure and evolve. Think of this as a journey. Thank you.